Are you praying that God would just help you to be walking the path that He's called your life to? Do you care that He has a plan? You just kind of rock and roll, if something goes wrong, just pray and see if He'll fix it for you. Because you can't walk out His plan for your life nearly as well if you're oblivious to the fact that it exists, that there are actually things He wants for you. And there have been times when He's walked me into situations that didn't end up being a great financial blessing or super success and those type of things, but they're just as much a place He walked me into. Because you know what? Most of the time, it's more productive for us to learn than to stuff dollar bills in our back pocket. A wise person who's related to me says, people pray for blessing, but what they really want isn't blessing. It's easy. They just want easy. If I pray as a young boy for God to bless me with the intelligence and the dedication to work that it would take for me to become a pediatrician, a doctor for kids, and then I get into school and I'm doing human anatomy and kinesiology and chemistry and all these bio courses, and they're really tough to go through. Hours upon hours and doing research and stuff that no person wants to do. If I see that trial as something that doesn't belong there, and I start praying for easy, then I could be short-circuiting the very vehicle God is using to take me to the blessing I've asked Him for in my life. Does that make sense? So just be careful that you're hearing His voice well enough that you know today what He's calling you to. And today's really what matters the most. He says, don't worry about tomorrow so much. It'll take care of itself. It has enough trouble of its own. Just worry about today. And have that ear open to hear what He's calling for you today so that you can know that there's peace in where you are. And you can know whether you ought to pray against that thing or learn from it, right? Because both are possible. We are in our series called Once Upon a Garden, and this is the third message in the series. We're really talking about Genesis chapter 2 and 3. We're spending about a month just in the story of the fall of man and looking for some truth there, and there is plenty of truth. If you have an ear to hear, hear. So in this room today, are you here expecting to learn something? Expecting to be challenged by Him, expecting to hear the voice of God call to your life and say, hey, I've got something for you. If you'll take it and put it in, it will change things. Are you here expecting that? Because if this is just kind of the task of sitting here listening to the dude talk for 25 minutes so that, that part of my day's done, and then don't let it be that. Don't let anything be that. Don't let the time you have with your kids be that. This is my learning space right here, like calm down and enjoy being a dad, right? Every moment He's designed for you, right? Live in those moments. All right, Genesis 2 and 3. These are the four things we really said we wanted to hit in this study. Number one, the battle we fight every day started in the garden. That was our first message. Number two, there are things in the garden that can teach us about today. Last week we talked about that piece, that there are things in the garden that can teach us about our life today. Number three, we did that last week. Number three, there is nothing new under the sun. And we're going to use Genesis 2 and 3 and also flip into the book of Ecclesiastes that Solomon wrote and look at some things he said there that actually talk about the garden. Okay? That's our message for today. There is nothing new under the sun. Some of you are thinking, yeah, well, they didn't have cell phones. Were there distractions under the sun? Yeah. Did they have technological advance? Yeah. I'm actually pretty convinced that there are things that man used to know and there was a time when mankind was more intelligent, just raw intelligence, than we are now. Why do you think that? Do you think, ancient alien invasion? And no, none of the garbage out there, okay? I think this. When God made Adam and Eve, he said, this is all very good. He made them perfect. Adam was like a day old and he named all the animals, right? I think mathematically what has happened since Adam and Eve is genetics simply gets diluted. Gets diluted. Where did Cain get his wife? There must be a problem with the Bible. Not really. He would have had to marry a sibling at that time in life, but Adam and Eve lived hundreds of years. We know that they had Cain. We know that they had a son named Abel. And we know that Cain killed Abel. And then we know that when Adam was 130 years old, he had a son named Seth, who was in his own image and likeness. So this boy apparently looked more like his dad than the other boys did. There's a lot of genetic diversity at that time. And Adam and Eve were most likely a much darker shade than we are, most of us in the room, because they held in their genetics all the possibilities for what we are today. And each generation, information is simply lost. All my kids can only at best get 50% of me, 50% of Sarah, 70-30. There's going to be information that I take to the grave that doesn't get passed on to my kids. And so now, like, you marry too closely, and the genetic maladies that have just been piling up over the millennia are much more often to rear their ugly head, and disease and different things happen. It's a lot of it is just very mathematically obvious. But we face the same things that man has faced from the beginning of time. Today in the service, I want you to look for common threads. Common threads. No matter the Bible story you read, you're going to see things and think, yeah, I kind of get that. I kind of get why they would be mad. I kind of get why he did that. Yeah, I kind of understand that. From the beginning until now, you're dealing with human nature. You're dealing with sin nature. And I'll describe it like this. I once had a guy say, so you believe in the Bible? I was like 21 years old, being trained by this highly sophisticated professional. He said, you believe in the Bible? I said, yeah. So you take the stories literally in the Bible? I said, yes. You see where we're going here. He says, so you believe Noah's Ark and Jonah and the whale? And I was like, did I misspeak before? And he said, okay, I've got a question for you. He says, please explain to me how my 6-month-old little girl is evil. And I said, I thought you were going to give me a hard question. I said, let me explain it this way. I said, you have a 5-year-old daughter too, right? When did you teach her to slap her sister and bite and kick and scream and throw temper tantrums in Walmart? I mean, when did you start training her for that? And he said, I don't train my kids. I said, well, where do you think she got that from? He said, your 6-month-old little girl is wired like all of us to do what she can do to get what it is that she wants. And some people are nicer than other people, but we're all wired to please me. And that's why people kill and rape and lie and cheat and fill in the blank. Because left to ourselves, the most important person in this world is me. I love my wife, but my heart likes me more. And if you're saying that, oh, I always put my spouse above myself, liar, liar, pants on fire, not the truth. You can act in a way that makes them think that so that you manipulate them in your world. Not the same. We are wired as selfish human beings. I said, you can call it whatever you want, but that is sin nature. And he said, you got me. And we talked deeply about many other things after that. But no matter how far back we look, you're dealing with human beings. And Moses was just like John Serio. He's a man who was prone to make decisions that aren't perfect all the time. He was a human being made out of meat, just like you and I. The characters in the Bible walked on this dirt. Do you know that Elijah and the story where he takes on all the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and God rains down fire and consumes the offering, and then they basically knock off 450 prophets, and then he beats the horses back to the city? Do you know he was running under the light of the same moon you look at every night? That's the same moon. Jesus looked at the same moon in the sky you look at every night. You're living on the earth, on the planet that's spoken of in Genesis chapter 1. You're living in the same world. You may touch the same water that washed the disciples' feet. I don't know. You might. It's still here. It hasn't gone anywhere. We're living in that world. This is not just a fairy tale book, guys. We live in the same world they did then, and you are made out of the same thing that they were. So these stories apply to you because you could plug yourself right in, and you're just as human as they are, right? Let's look this morning into Genesis chapter 3. Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." Let's not even finish that sentence. Let's just judge on that one. Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. I want to look at a couple of words right here. I want you to hold on to these. Right there. He drove out the man. Now I'm going to go back to the term common threads again. Okay? If you are careful to look for them, the Bible is loaded with common threads. Next week, we're going to talk about this in much greater depth, and I want to challenge you to begin to look for things, like you're reading a story in the New Testament and you start thinking, I've seen this before. This is the same feel. This is the same kind of thing happening. Where have I seen this before? And you're going to find that from Genesis through Revelation, the Bible is loaded with common threads. And many times they begin to reveal what God is doing. And you start to see his heart. Oh, his heart there. That's the same over here. Have you ever thought, in times when the nation of Israel is going into the promised land, and they at times they go into battles and like people are wiped out, like Jericho, the only people who lived in Jericho was Rahab and her extended family. Everyone else like was killed in that whole big battle. Like that's pretty violent. And people are like, man, how could God be like that? Have you ever watched The Passion of the Christ? Wow. Sin has a massive consequence. That doesn't change. What changed is that one came to take that wrath on himself so that we could be rescued from that. But that justice doesn't ever change, doesn't go away. It's just taken on by one who came to ransom you. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. I want to flip now to the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, this is written by Solomon, David's son. So this is way before Jesus, right? Solomon was actually the child of David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba is the woman whose husband he had killed to steal this guy's wife. This is their boy. And I always bring these things up because no matter where your life has been or where you're from, or whether or not there's honor in your family line or not, over and over, God chooses to use the flawed lines in the places where people massively messed up, and he brings Jesus through those lines. And he does that to say, I will use anyone who puts their life in my hands. I will use them to glorify myself, right? He was born in a manger, not in a 2019 NICU, okay? He was born in a manger. Ecclesiastes 1:6-10. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. Does anybody see something here that you might not expect to see in a guy, hundreds of years before Christ? Anybody notice anything in this verse? The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Goes around what? Goes around the globe? You mean a ball? You mean a circular, not flat sphere in space? Wow. So Solomon, this guy like hundreds of years BC, actually talks about the earth as though it's round. I thought they were dumb. I thought they used stones to do everything. No, they were intelligent. And on its circuits, the wind returns. Yeah, that's a relatively modern understanding that the wind actually blows in circuits that are predictable. He also talks about the oceans flowing in their circuits. We now know that that is actually the case. All the streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. He's talking about the water cycle. Solomon understood that the water that flows into the oceans is where the rain comes from, and that the water that's flown into the oceans will flow there again. That is, we didn't know that hundreds of years ago. So there was they call it the Dark Ages for a reason. We weren't as smart as they were for a long time. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I want you to notice something. Remember what I told you to this little phrase? He drove out man from the garden. Look at what this says. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. This is Solomon. Solomon decides in his massive wealth, potentially the most wealthy man ever to live, he had nations giving him potentially trillions of dollars every year. He built palaces and castles, and there are even stories of people coming to him for wisdom. He very likely gained additional wisdom in sand hydraulics and different things from Egypt. He married one of Pharaoh's daughters. Probably one of the most wise men to ever live. And he got his wisdom from a very amazing experience. When he first became king, God asked him, ask of me what you want. And Solomon said, I'm young. Please give me wisdom to rule your people justly. And God says, because you have asked me for wisdom, I will give you wisdom, but I will also give you power and wealth and leverage in your world. But I will bless you with wisdom. And there's stories about Solomon coming up with solutions for problems that nobody was thinking of at the time. One story famously, in fact, I have a flashback of Superbook. One night when I was doing Wednesday night, there were two women who had babies, newborns, and one woman's baby died. And so during the night, she took her child and put it next to another mom and took her baby and put it in bed with her. And when the other woman woke up, she found that the child was dead, but she said, "This isn't my child." And the thief mom says, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about." So nobody can solve this problem. How do we know? How do we know which one is the real mom? So they bring them to Solomon, and Solomon says, "Bring me a sword." And then he says, "Bring me the child that's alive, and we'll cut it in half and give one half to each mom." Now, at that point, one of the kids is like, "I don't like this story." And I said, "Nothing's going to happen to the baby. Just watch how wise Solomon is." Why do you think he did that? Sounds kind of dumb. He knew that the real mom would rather another woman raise her child than to see her own child die. And so the one woman says, "No, don't hurt the child, don't hurt the child. Let her have the child." And he says, "That is the child's mom." Right? An amazing story. But that's how God blessed Solomon. Things were just obvious to him. But in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon is basically saying, I've searched the world. I've given my time and my effort to everything. I've withheld nothing that brought joy to me, whether that be relationships or things or travel or homes or anything he could find that he thought would please him, he would indulge in. And he says everything is vanity. Work is vanity, and rest is vanity, and living a long life is vanity, and it's all chasing the wind. It's just there's nothing. And he ends this book by saying the only good thing there is to do is fear the Lord and serve him. But one of the things in his wisdom that he realizes is this thing. God has put eternity in the hearts of man, and God seeks what has been driven away. What is it about this story that we could be missing? What could we be missing? There's actually another term in here that's a common thread that when I saw it was amazing to me. Every searching of the eyes of man is vanity until he finds Jesus. So if we go back and we look at, okay, so Adam and Eve fall, they sin, God says, we certainly don't want them to live forever. So he makes it impossible for them to walk the way that leads to the tree of life. He guards it with an angel with a flaming sword. Now, this may seem obvious to some, but why would God cause man's life to be limited at this time? Why would he say he doesn't want man to live forever? I think the simple answer is that man, at this point in the story, is living a life separated from God. He's living in a fallen world. He's having to work, and by the sweat of his brow does he produce things, and sickness and disease have entered into his world at this time. He has a son. He loses a son. You realize the first parent that ever existed buried a child before he died, and likely more than one. For God to let man live forever is to curse him with eternal separation from himself. In this state, we cannot live in the presence of God. And so death, one way or another, becomes the answer. Last week we talked about death being how we live for him. Laying down our life and choosing to die to self is the answer for being changed and renewed and dwelled in by him. And death seems like the last place we would go, but it's actually the way we're saved. And the way we're sanctified is to choose to be that grain of wheat that enters the ground, to go into the tomb of baptism and come out, and our life is then ruled by him. So here it says, he drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Let's look at a different word here. In this story, there is a way to get to life. And the way is guarded by an angel with a flaming sword. Why is this way guarded by an angel with a flaming sword? Because this is a way that man can live forever through the work of his own hand. right? If this way was available to man, then man could, by the work of his own hand and his own effort, attain life. But God had to let us know that this is something that you cannot attain yourself. By the work of your hand, you cannot attain life. I don't think that it's coincidental that Jesus said this. I am the way. Way back in the garden, there's a tree of life that renews man, that heals sickness, that takes away death. And God says, now that they are sinful, I need to take away the way to life that man can do himself. And Jesus comes 4,000 roughly years later and says, I'm the way. I'm the way to life. No man comes to the Father but through me. I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of next week, okay? Adam and Eve, at the moment of the fall, decide to take fruit from a tree, right? They make a decision contrary to what God has told them to do. They take fruit off of a tree, and they eat, and they bring sin and death into our world. Life is also found by what's hanging on a tree. This is so rich. Where did Jesus go to pray? And where was he when he surrendered to God's plan to save mankind? He was in a garden. He was in an orchard, a place loaded with trees. And he could have chosen something other than what God had planned. At that point, and through his death, he was without sin. He stood in the same place in a way that Adam and Eve did. He was without sin. And he made the choice to take the cup that God had handed him, to take all of man's sin on him, and to lay down his life and die for us. He chose God's way when there couldn't have been a stronger reason not to. There's one tree. And then the Word of God says, cursed is him who is hung on a tree. Jesus dies on a tree. And I'm going to say that the tree of life is a type and shadow of the tree that would bring life, the cross. Do you think that the blood of a lamb at the time the Jews were going to come out of Egypt at Passover, do you think it's coincidental that the blood of lamb is shed on a wooden lintel and doorposts? You think that's coincidence? I don't. It was shed on the lintel and doorposts. And every house covered by that blood was saved from sin and rescued out of bondage. I almost wish today was next week, because I'm so excited to show you the things that God has just made obvious to me that are all over the place. They're in more than one place, and you're going to find yourself going, no way. How did I never see that? What this message is really meant to do, this whole series, is to help us realize that we are not far removed from the fall of man. We are not far removed from the garden. We're human beings, and all the things that Adam and Eve dealt with, and all the things that all the biblical characters have dealt with, we deal with today. This is not a story, a thousands of year old just book of stories that have no bearing. We are living the continuation of these people. We are their great-great-grandkids. We are living on this earth a continuation of the people who lived and were talked about in the Word of God. And he's coming back. He's coming back. When he said to them, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. He wasn't joking around. This world is going to come to an end. Jim and I were, I don't even know where we were driving to the other day, and we started talking about the millennial reign, like when everything kind of wraps up and, this 7 years of tribulation happens and kind of that part closes up and all the world comes to attack Israel and Jesus returns in that spot, puts his foot on the Mount of Olives. He's going to rule and reign on this planet for what's that going to be like for 1,000 years? I'm like, am I going to drive a car there? I mean, am I going to have a job? What's that whole thing going to look like? And there certainly is a lot to it that we don't know. We'll get there and be like, oh, I thought. But there is so much in store to look forward to. I tell you, some of us have lost loved ones. I lost my mom when I was 23. I have 2 kids on the other side that I haven't never met. And a lot of you have that same thing. This is a breath. This is a day. And here's what I want to encourage you to not be. Don't be the 3-year-old pitching a fit because the day they're in has got some junk in it. And they're just not happy. It's not going their way, and this is the worst ever. There is so much waiting for us. Don't ever let this be more than it is. It's a breath. It's a day. I'm going to know someday why my kids have never met my mom. They're going to meet her. She's going to tell them all the junk about me then that she can't tell them about me now. But this is so quick, man. This will be gone before you know it, and there's so much to look forward to there. So Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. God didn't take away the way to the tree of life because he just wanted to be mean and wanted us to die. He took it away because he had a better answer. And the way was still going to be hanging on a tree. It was just going to be a man who absorbed all of our death and pain and loss and made a way for us.